Hello, everyone, and welcome to Changing the Narrative Around Duchenne. I'm Tim Buck, and I work at Sarepta, and I'm pleased to be your co-host today. I want to start by thanking Dr. Natalie Truba and JB for being here with us on this program and sharing their experience and advice. Both of them are being compensated by Sarepta for their time today. And as a reminder, today's program is an event provided by Sarepta for educational purposes only and is not intended to be medical advice. For medical or treatment-related questions, these are best addressed by your healthcare team. And like I mentioned, this event is not for information around specific products, clinical trials, or studies. Again, your healthcare team is your best resource for questions around those topics. We're probably going to run somewhere between 30 and 40 minutes, and we will be taking questions during the event. Given the amount of tips and tricks our co-hosts have for you today, we probably won't be able to get to every single one of your questions. But if you do have a great question, I encourage you to submit it, and we'll try and send you a response as a direct message after the event. Lastly, we encourage you to connect with us after the program. I'll have a QR code up on the screen, and you can sign up there. By signing up there, it's the best way for us to stay in touch with you and let us know when we have more webinars like this one that have helpful tips and tricks for the Duchenne community. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Truba, who's going to get us started.
Hello and welcome. My name is Dr. Natalie Truba, and I'm a clinical psychologist with specialized training in pediatric psychology. And in my work, I work directly with patients and families impacted and who are living with rare diseases and complex medical conditions, many of which who are diagnosed with Duchenne muscular dystrophy. And I'm really excited and happy to be here with you guys today to talk about these tips and tricks.
Hey guys, I'm JB. My husband and I live in coastal Virginia with our two children, Charlie, who's 15 and living with Duchenne, and our daughter Cece, who is 8. I'm super pumped to be here with you guys today.
When I first started working with families in our MDA clinic here at Nationwide Children's Hospital, there were a lot of things that struck with me. And one of the things that struck me the most was the large emotional and physical burden experienced and contacted by families living with and caring for somebody living with Duchenne muscular dystrophy. There's just a lot of burdens that you all take on as caregivers. And I had a lot of parents and caregivers tell me things that they manage throughout their day, like stretches and bracing and appointments. And it's a lot to manage. It seemed like a lot to manage to me, and it still does after doing this for many years. And from my perspective, some of the families were saying to me, I can handle the physical aspects of Duchenne. I get the muscle pieces. I get what we need to do for the muscle pieces. What I can't handle, what I'm struggling with, what I need help with, are the behavioral and emotional challenges that impact our quality and impact our daily functioning, and that make me not always like my kid. And I don't have a ton of time with my kid maybe, and I really want to like them and enjoy that time. And I don't want to be, upset when they get home from school during the 4 or 5 hours that we have together. And I've worked with a lot of families who say these things. There's some version of those things. And I learned through working with them that families that care for people with Duchenne are incredibly hardworking and able and willing to do all the things needed to create big change and to support the needs of their kids. Because you're just used to going above and beyond as part of caring for somebody with DMD. And before we start to dive into these tips, JB, I want to say, and I want the audience to know, and something that you and I know to be true, which is that behavioral work, behavioral change is incredibly difficult, very challenging. What we're talking about today isn't easy. It's not an easy task. We don't tend to make it sound easier than it is. But we hope that you'll see these things as worth it, albeit hard, but worth it, and that they can have a really big impact, a very meaningful impact, and on how we live life and the quality that we bring to our life. So we're going to focus on 3 specific tips today. And for each tip, we're going to tell you a little bit about why we recommend it, why we think it's important, and JB will share some insights that she has to offer as a mom who lives this life and does these things in context of living life, being a mom caring for somebody with Duchenne. So thank you all for being here. We're going to jump in and get started. The first tip that we're going to talk about is understand the value of a constructive mindset. We're going to start at the basics. Why is changing the narrative around Duchenne so important? I think it's important because I think words are very powerful. And how we talk about things, how we frame things is going to determine how we interact with it, how we treat it, maybe what we do to solve it or deal with it. It also impacts how we perceive reality and how we understand the things happening to and around us. And there's this popular saying I'm sure a lot of you have heard, right? Sticks and stones will break my bones, but words will never hurt me. And I hate that saying. One, because it's not true, and two, because the opposite is actually true, and it sends a bad message. Bones heal, right? And very rarely do you have a bone that is broken that gives you problems 20, 25 years later on when you're an adult. But words will stick with you, and they're very hard to let go, and they will cause lasting damage, and they can rear their ugly head all sorts of times, whether it's 50 years after the fact, 2 hours after the fact, 5 minutes, many years. And so words are incredibly powerful. And so the words that we use and how we teach our kids language is really, really important to helping them learn to cope and understand their world. And for me, in this sense, mindset becomes really important because mindset is really about the ways that our prior learning experiences, the things that have happened to us, impact how we see things now and what we do now and the ways that we think right now. And how do we understand currently what's happening in relation to what's happened to us in the past? It really comes down to the beliefs that we have formed and the rules that we've developed and how these things occur together with prior learning experiences to impact how we feel about any particular thing in any given moment. So mindset for me can really change depending on what's going on and where we're at in life. And I also don't think it's something that's stagnant and stable and constant. I think it is constantly being influenced and evolving, but I don't think it constantly stays the same. And that's what we're here today, really, to start to think about how to shift our mindset so that it benefits us and that we can improve our lives in the ways that we want. So I'm wondering, JB, does having a more positive mindset impact your day-to-day experience as a caregiver? And wondering if you'd be willing to share some experiences with us.
Yeah, sure. You're absolutely right. As far as having a positive mindset, it affects every part of our day. Charlie's 15. He uses a wheelchair to get around. So we do not travel light. We have like a huge circus with us, right? A wheelchair lift, all kinds of things. Having to pull equipment out of the car every time we go somewhere. It's funny, not too long ago, Charlie and I had parked at an appointment. We were getting everything together to head into the doctor's appointment. And for some reason, things just kept falling everywhere. It was like a comedy of errors. It was ridiculous. And Charlie and I were laughing about it. The man and the woman in the car next to us, they got out. They were like, you guys are having way too much fun over there. And to me, if we don't see the moments like that in all of this, we would dread the appointment. Things are going to happen. Who wants to spend all day at the doctor's, at every visit? Who wants to travel an hour and a half to get there? Instead of dreading it, we can just, see it as time together. And that's how we've chosen to look at this. We listen to music, we do our Spanish lessons. We talk about silly things, we have to find the humor and the positivity in even the simplest of tasks, which isn't always easy.
I think that's a really great example, JV, because in that situation, there was something that was going on that you couldn't change. You didn't have control over. You and Charlie had to go to that appointment, right? And dreading the appointment doesn't change the fact that you have to go. They have to be there. So reframing how you thought about it, how you thought about the appointment, which meant, spending time with Charlie, having one-on-one time, getting, just to do you two, right? Made the situation a lot more positive. And that was intentional. Like, you didn't have to do that, right? Like, you chose to do that. You chose to approach it in that way. And I think it's important to note here that not only does this shift help you have a more enjoyable time for yourself and for Charlie, but you're passing that on to him. You're modeling how to respond to things that we don't have control over, and a way to choose our response. Like, we don't always have control. It happens to us, but we do have control over how we respond to things that happen to us, right? So I'm wondering, JB, like, shifting that narrative for yourself, has that rubbed off at Charlie? Is that something that you've seen? Do you think that modeling those types of choices is important, especially when we're modeling the choice to be positive? And can you share some other examples that you might have with us, so that for the community to kind of see maybe ways that they could adopt some of those things that you do?
Yeah, as far as Charlie goes, he has that outlook on pretty much every situation. But that is by design. We've tried to shape that, we've tried to model that. And, within Charlie, we've kind of created that outlook for him. From my perspective as a parent, I never want him to see his healthcare or his appointments like as a drudgery, because this is long term. This is going to be here with us. He can't say at 15, like, oh gosh, I have PT on Monday and speech on Tuesday, OT on Wednesday. It's just what we have to do, right? These are like non-negotiables for us. And I think that the powerful mindset that we have is really like what changes the trajectory of how we face this journey with Duchenne. I try to tell him that he's got to be in total control when he arrives at any place, because there is no guarantee of how this is going to play out for you. You may not be able to control anything that happens in that space, but you can have control over how you feel and what you take away from it. One example of this that I think is important, just this was outrageous, and it's like a perfect example of the storm that can happen. But a few months ago, we had a bone scan and it took us hours to get there because there was an accident in the tunnel, right? Completely out of our control. We get to the appointment, the receptionist says like, oh, you're not supposed to be here today. And, there was a miscommunication with the scheduler. You're here a whole month early. And that is like double whammies, right? In succession, right? In that moment, it could have been such a problem. I had taken off work. We had sat in traffic. They began apologizing for the error. People don't want this to happen to you, right? They're not trying to set you up for failure. But I realized like in that moment, I could model for my children, like, it's okay to extend that grace, and it's okay that we let them know that mistakes happen. And we don't have to be stuck in that, we don't have to be caught in that moment of frustration. Instead of it being a negative, I just said, you know what, Charlie, let's go to Dumars. It's a little drive-in, like right down from where we were. And I said, I have the day off of work. Let's just, make a day. We're here. Let's go make a day of it. Let's have fun. And at the end of the day, instead of looking at all that had gone wrong, Charlie was like, that was a great day, Mom. And it could have very easily have gone the other way. But again, it's that mindset and just like taking it as it comes and being willing to roll with it.
Thanks, JB. I love that example because it's something that, I personally have also contacted those types of experiences. And I think it's something that we all, what a good time to practice, that those things are going to happen throughout life. Hopefully not an accident in the tunnel every time you go to your medical visits, but definitely having that skill set to be able to navigate that is incredibly important. And I love that you made the best out of the day. You made the best out of what you had control over. Is like, what do you do with the rest of your time? Like, we're obviously not, you can't like bust down the medical door and get into a visit. So you're just going to come back in a month and let's use the day and have fun with it. And I think the other important part that you said there is that like Charlie has to learn how to take care of himself. And these appointments are part of his journey with Duchenne, and hating visits and wanting to avoid him and not go, right? Like, what a problematic pattern of skills to develop early on, right? So using that as an opportunity to be like, sometimes these things are going to happen. It's not great. And, we're going to turn into a good day, like buffers, right? The other things that he could learn about what may be associated with these medical visits, that when he's 18, 19, making his own decisions, right? You want him to still be making good decisions for himself and his healthcare. And by setting that tone with him early, you're really helping to shape positive perspective taking, but intentional positive perspective taking, right? That's in his control. And like, what a powerful place to be making decisions from, especially as he learns to navigate not only healthcare appointments, but like who's on his team and how does he utilize them and make sure that the people he needs to be meeting with are the people he's meeting with, which are just really important skills to learn as you get older. So yeah, thank you for that. That's a great example. Now that we've had a couple good examples of ways that small things can have big impacts on our mindset and shifting that mindset in our day, I want to talk about a little bit about how we get there. How do we actually shift perspective? Because shifting your narrative doesn't happen overnight. It's a daily practice. It's intentional. It's cultivated. It's something that we either are winning or learning, right? So we're not failing because we're going to keep doing it. And as we touched on before, our mindset is just constantly evolving and changing as the world evolves and change. And so having a growth mindset can just be really, really powerful for any of us as humans, but especially powerful when you're living with a chronic illness that has a lot of things involved with it, like Duchenne. So our second tip that we're going to move into from there is shift your perspective on care, support, and equipment. And a lot of times I'll say to parents and caregivers when we're trying to get a sense of this, it's like, walk me through your day. I want to be able to see it in my head, right? I want to know how everything goes together. And I'm sure everyone in the audience can relate to this because there's just a lot of stuff that y'all have to do to take care of kids. And a lot of families will say to me, I wake up at 5 a.m. because if I don't, I can't get all this done before my kids get on the bus at 8, right? And I like to stop them after each one and say, why do we get up at 5? Is this because we have to get everything done? Or is there another reason you get up at 5? Do you enjoy getting up at 5? Are you a night person or a morning person? Just really trying to understand the rationale for that and the why. Because it helps to, when we're analyzing and understanding our schedules, to know not only that what we're doing, but like why we're doing it and how these things chain together. So that we're making sure that we're addressing our needs and not just doing things because we've always done them, because we are humans as are creatures of habit, and we can stay in habit patterns that don't necessarily serve us simply because we're comfortable. And so it's really important that we're regularly, like throughout life, not daily, because your things aren't going to change that drastic, but every so often that you're stepping back and saying, does this still work for me? One example that I come across often where we do this in our clinic anyway, is when parents are talking about how they limit travel away from home. And oftentimes we hear it in the, I don't travel, we don't drive anywhere that's more than, 30 minutes or 30 miles kind of away from our home, because we have to be able to get home quickly. And I'm like, why do you have to be able to get home so quickly? And a lot of times it's because, well, if they have a bathroom need, or if they need to be changed, or something happens, like we don't have a lift, we're not guaranteed that we'll be able to do that or help them. They get really anxious about it because it makes them uncomfortable. So we just don't do it. We just make sure that we can go home no matter what we're doing in 20 to 30 minutes. And I'll often find myself saying, wow, like to me, and from my perspective, just listening to your guys' story, it seems like you're really limited in what you guys can do and where you can go. And that limits not only you, but your child and your other children as well. Are you interested in exploring whether or not there are ways that maybe we could change that or think about changing that? And this is where we can start to brainstorm tools, including other people that we might think to bring in to kind of help alleviate some of the burdens or demands, drawn on our time. And humans, we're amazing creatures. We're one of the few creatures that can really not only develop and design and use, but refine tools as well to continue to improve our life. And when I say tools, when I mean Duchenne, I mean all sorts of things, but mostly I think the big tools are those that make experiences easier: wheelchairs, lifts, but also people like in-home aides and care support people. I'm wondering if any of that rings true for you, where in life that you've maybe found you and your family getting stuck, and sort of what you've done when you realized that you were stuck to kind of change that pattern to get to a new place of functioning.
Yeah, absolutely. All of that, right? Showering, toileting, it all takes up so much of our day. And it's necessary, right? Like these things have to happen. We've set up our bathroom so that Charlie can do as much as possible on his own. We have automatic soap dispensers, toothpaste dispensers. He has a loofah on a stick. Anything that can make our lives easier as it relates to bathing. We've just incorporated it into his routine. It's just become what is normal. And with toileting, you're like, yes, I hear them, these parents, like we were having trouble driving places and having to stop and like get everything out of the car. So I just bought disposable urinals, right? Like, why make it hard on ourselves? Let's hit that easy button, right? A disposable urinal. I didn't even know that they existed, but you just learn these things. You start seeking these tools. And so having that, disposable urinal, like in the car, we just throw it away later. If he has a friend over, he can be discreet. He can wear his tearaway pants. They don't even notice that he's preparing to go to the bathroom. And if he doesn't want to go through that whole process of like being lifted and moved, we just use a disposable urinal from his chair. It saves everyone time. It's worth it for our family. And it allows him a little bit of discretion. Like he can, be discreet and not be on display. So not only is it easy, but it saves them a little bit of dignity, right?
Thank you for sharing that. I think that's a really powerful example of just the ways that you guys work together to collaboratively problem solve something that was challenging. And more challenging than it maybe needed to be. So I just empowers him. I love that. And this is an exercise that anyone can really do, right? Like they could do that with themselves. You could do it with a different adult that you trust, whether that's, a family member, a therapist, a clergyman, whoever it is, right? That could be a sounding board that can help you think of solutions that sometimes just hard to see when you're in it, right? When you're doing this, right? Like walk through your day step by step and look at where you're spending your time. Ask yourself, is there anything that I want to be doing less of? If I had more time, what would I do with that extra time? And try to brainstorm what tools or supports might be needed in order to help you achieve those things that you want to achieve and lessen some of those time consuming tasks or demands on your time. Remembering that what we need and want in life is always going to change. It might change over time, but it's going to be different than what other people need and want in their lives. And so it's a very personal exercise, and learning from other people is really important, but trying to adopt another family's way of doing something 100% is going to be painful, because each family is unique. And so really thinking through how things work for you and your family, there's no right and wrong, it's just what works best for you, is incredibly important. Because we want to make sure that we're thinking about tools as things that help us, and we want to develop mantras in our home that focus our kids on seeing tools as supports and good things, not as like we failed or we're not good enough or we didn't do well enough, so we need this help. It's not that. Help is a good thing, not a bad thing. Tim, before we continue, I want to make sure that we're not missing any questions before I jump into our next tip. Is there anything that's been coming through?
Let's see. Yeah, so we did have one question come through. It's actually related to what we're chatting about. The question is, when is it a good time to introduce support people or aides into your child's care?
That is a great question. Of course, it depends on what's right for you and your family. In my experience, though, I see a lot of families benefit from getting tools and supports, especially support people, aides, incorporated into their functioning, into sort of how they live life as early on as possible, as early on as they can possibly get those things. I unfortunately see a lot of parents who later on, once their children are either late adolescents or adults, who have a lot of challenges trying to incorporate new tools, new people into how they live life. And it's important to remember that it is a lot easier to do these things when our kids are young and more mobile, one, but two, littler and easier to move and lift and those types of things. And so, doing things for kids 6, 7, 8 is different than when they're 16, 17, 18. And so being mindful of what do we need to do now to get ready for those other times, so that doesn't feel more hard than it needs to, is really important. In addition to day-to-day, it also helps your kids learn like really important life skills that they need to learn. Having someone else there to support them or to help them means they have to get comfortable asking somebody that's not their primary caregiver or parent what they need, right, and what they want, and not only asking, but sometimes describing what they want, right? Like maybe they want that on their shelf a very particular way, right? And you're just not lining it up right, but they need to be able to coach that through and talk that through in a way that's not demanding and not mean and not rude. Because the thing about tools and support people is they don't have to do it, right? They're there to help, and if you drive them away, then we lost a tool or a support person. We don't want to do that. You have to develop patience, right? Because you have to wait for a new person to learn how to do things. It impacts language and social skills, right? Because we're developing more rich language and more rich ways of engaging socially with somebody when we're frustrated or displaying patience, but that also is trying to help us, right? You develop cognitive flexibility because there's a lot that goes into trying to understand different ways of doing things, and that's okay, and accepting that I can feel uncomfortable and something's still okay, right? There's a lot of good, really important skills that go into those processes that are important to learn early on in life. So I hope that answers that question. But I want to bring it back to JB a bit here, because I want to get our resident expert here on tools and letting tools be helpful to us. So I'm wondering though, JB, like you talked a little bit about tools, what about supports and support, either equipment or aids or other things that you guys have found that you've incorporated in your family and the benefits of that?
Yeah, like we are so grateful for tools, right? Like I was so opposed to them for so long, or like hesitant to find these things that could work for us. I just thought like it had to be hard. But our chair, our lift, like those are tools that have come into our life and they are just so beneficial, right? It's a little cumbersome to learn, but you just get used to this way of doing things. And then it becomes just second nature, I had a hard time when Charlie started walking less and less. And I felt like we were closing a chapter, right, in his life. And at the time, I had a toddler. And so that was an extra layer on top of that, that really became another layer of challenge, right? Like, how is this going to work? And, Charlie said to me, like, Mom, I think today's my last day walking. And he was 10, and I wasn't there. Like, I was just not seeing that. I thought, no, you've still got this in you, buddy. And he said, no, Mom, I'm faster in my chair. And it was so casual for him. Like, I've spoken about that before. I'm sure people have, heard me say that, but it just clicked. Like, all right, he sees this chair as a tool. Like, he's faster. It helps him get around. I've got to get there, right? Like, I have to get there. And, the chair is a benefit to him. It's not the end of something. It's the beginning of him really learning how to use things that he needs. And that was such like an advocacy moment for himself. Like, it's just neat to look back on that he now sees these tools as things that will help him accomplish what he needs to accomplish, whether that's a daily task or something in the future. When it comes to friends, he often says, like, it's just how I get around. It's so casual for him. It doesn't change anything about me. It's just how I get around. And, I think the support piece that you mentioned is just as casual for him now. But that, again, was something I had to get used to in our house. It's a lot to welcome someone into your space. I had posted on Facebook thinking like, oh, we'll look for someone. And that person popped up very quickly and I had to get there. And it was someone we didn't expect. It was a chef at a local restaurant that our family frequented. And it just proves that help can come from somewhere least expected. And that was a transition in our lives. Like, I had to get there quickly because he was offering to help. And, for Charlie, we wanted to make it a slower transition, giving Greg more and more responsibilities. That was something that we really had to kind of take slowly at first, but then it became very natural and that made it easy for Charlie. And now Charlie works part-time there. He works at the restaurant with this really amazing person who's become not only just a valuable tool for us, but just somebody really great to have in our lives.
I am beyond glad that you found somebody so wonderful to help hang out and care for and do things with Charlie and y'all at home. And I hope we all can find our own chef in that way to help us. What a great human. Thank you for sharing that, JB. That's a cool example. I think that's also speaks to, like, you never know where you're going to get help, right? And you never know who's going to be like the one that is like, you're like, oh wow, you're reliable and this is amazing. Even if they've never even cared for somebody, right? I don't know if that was his first time, but it sounds like he just jumped in and was like ready to go. So
yeah, first time right off the bat, just took the challenge, right?
I love it. I think this is a good place to kind of transition to our next tip, which is reset those perceptions of the future in an evolving world. As we've discussed, humans are really good at creating tools, and this applies to medicine and science as well, right? The Duchenne experience evolves, it's going to continue to evolve, and families have more access to possibilities now than they ever have, right? We're not talking about treatment options right now during this webinar, but I do think it's important to talk about how the evolving landscape that is treatment options and sort of therapeutics within the DMD, DBMD space impacts families living this from a day-to-day standpoint. I think depending on your age at this point, like, it's pretty fair to say you might have a very different experience living with Duchenne than you do maybe somebody who's a lot older or somebody who's a lot younger, depending on where you are. And even within the same cohort of kids, they might have different experiences because of the treatment options available to them and the therapeutics available. And so people's experiences are varying, right, in ways that maybe they didn't used to. And I'm wondering, JB, as a mom living this, like, how are you feeling about this changing and evolving landscape?
First, I just want to say that there is a lot of reason to be excited and to have hope. We've been in clinical trials over the years. This is not new for us. Where we are currently, it has just been part of our journey, part of our experience. And we have learned through all of that we have to live for today. Trials begin, trials end, research happens. Again, it's seasons, right? So we don't know what's coming tomorrow. We can't know. We only know what is available to us today. And so that's the narrative that we choose, in our home. And we've learned that lesson kind of the hard way, right? When Charlie was younger, there were 2 clinical trials that our doctors were really optimistic would be perfect for us and that he would find benefit from. And my husband and I were all in, right? We were fully committed to these trials. And about 1.5 years into this, we're talking time, right? Commitment. And 1.5 years in, we found out that there was not going to be the benefit that we had hoped for him. But we decided to keep going because this is not just right for our family, right? It's right for every family that's fighting for this. And, the victory is not just ours, it's for our community. And, that's just a philosophy that we adopted early on. And that experience really taught us that we can't put all of our hope into what is coming, right? Like, it doesn't mean that we're not hopeful. It just means that we are really content and like finding happiness and peace and like where we are right now. And there is so much to be hopeful for. There's a lot to be excited about when it comes to Duchenne, and just daily life, as far as advancements go. Like, we find excitement in seeing kids graduate from high school and college and start not just little jobs here and there, but actual careers. We're seeing that they have formed relationships with romantic partners, right? These are things that we never thought would be possible within his lifespan. And so we want to make sure that we're fostering that for Charlie and helping him navigate it for himself as he matures. And it's just really cool. It's cool that what we thought about Duchenne even 10 years ago is not where we are, right? These things that weren't on our radar truly are what we are looking forward to. And so that is exciting in itself and hopeful, hope-filled.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up, JB, and the hopeful versus hope verse. That's such an important distinction, right? Because to be hopeful is different than having than pure hope in that one moment, right? Like, I love that. And you bring up a lot of good points that I do think are important to maybe touch on next, which is talking about the future, right? And preparing your children to talk about their future, to navigate that future, right? Before we do though, Tim, let's pause to see if there's any other questions that make sense to answer now before we move on.
Yeah, and I think one that came in, I think is actually related to what you were both just talking about. So the question is, I'm having trouble knowing how to talk about the future with my child. How do you approach Duchenne topics in an age-appropriate way? JB, do you want to kick this one off?
Yeah, sure. As far as the progression of Duchenne, we don't really talk about that a lot in our house. Like, we talk about the future, right? We talk about what our future could look like, but we don't focus on the progression. And that's different for every family. But you see a variety of how people approach that whenever you are in clinical trials or when you are, in a conference setting, right? You just see how people approach that future versus progression, right? And I think they're very different. When Charlie was younger, we had a friend whose daughter asked him, like, what are you going to do when your legs stop working, right? That is a hard question, no matter what age you are. But Charlie didn't have an answer. It wasn't age appropriate really for where he was. And, he was young. He did not know that this could happen, right? We just didn't focus on that, that progression piece. So afterwards, after she asked that, it really gave us an opportunity to speak life into that, right? Like, we don't know what's going to happen in the future. We don't know that the progression will put you in a chair. We don't know when that would happen. And so, he wasn't age appropriate. It wasn't ready. He wasn't ready, to think about that and all that would come. It just needed to be where we are. like where we are today, and more so what the future can hold, not what it will hold. You get
Yep.
focused on that. And we have to reset our expectations, right? Whenever things happen, whether it be a treatment that's in the works or whether it be, a loss of skill, like you have to reset your expectations. And, as Dr. Truba said, that's not just a Duchenne skill, like that's a life skill. But we also want to continue being hope-filled. So that changes how we talk about it.
I'll add to that a little bit too, Tim, if that's okay.
Sure.
I think it's important to involve and include your child in their healthcare based on their maturity and level of understanding. I think that's such an important part that JB touched on. It's not that, kids don't need to know everything all at once, upon time of diagnosis. Like they're tiny little humans, right? Like their brains are not evolved enough yet to accept that and know what to do with it. But it is good for them to understand what's going on, right? In a way that they understand things. There are families who choose to wait to talk about things. And if that works for you, great, do you, right? The rule of thumb that I encourage, if that's the route you're going to take, is to be very mindful and thoughtful that when your child starts to ask questions, not only just about, their experiences, like why do we go to these medical visits, but maybe what's going on with their bodies or what they might notice or what they might be noticing, but not sharing, right? Because kids tend to hold on to things if they don't have the right language or they don't know how to make sense of it. Because we want them to know what's going on in their bodies. We want them to understand, but we want that to be done in a way that's developmentally appropriate, right? Like where are they at? What is their age developmentally? How do they understand? What can they understand, right? And an honest, right? So when your kids are asking questions, you want to make sure they're preserving that sense of trust that kids have with their parents, that parents are safety. They're going to be honest with me. They're going to tell me those things that are true, right? So that we preserve that, because losing that can be incredibly damaging. And so my caveat is, do you, with the caveat, when your child starts to ask questions and bring things up, that we are responding in that in a way that they can understand and that is honest. In that vein also, I think it's really important, and I think this is what JB is speaking to largely, is that we do this in a way that preserves not only hope, but that child individual's ability to cope, right? And to either cultivate, develop, or sustain whatever resilience sort of capacity they have. And so using JB's example of explaining to Charlie that you don't know, what's going to happen in the future. Nobody does. We don't have a crystal ball. None of us can predict the future 100%. We definitely know things that are more likely, right? And we could talk about that, but we don't know the future. And so we explain that there are kids maybe with Duchenne who use wheelchairs, and there are kids that don't use wheelchairs. And we tell them, regardless of which way we end up, that we are going to keep living life. We're going to figure it out. We're going to have the tools we need to have, and we're going to be happy because we are going to make happy happen, right? Like we are choosing to live that life, and we'll do the things we need to do to get there, right? And as they're able, you want to encourage them to ask those questions, promote their understanding of not only their own health, but utilizing their healthcare team, like who's on their team and who does what and how do I use them when I need them, right? Because that's really important when it comes to not only helping your kids understand DMD and like their experiences, but the whole aspect of care, right? That goes into staying healthy and to getting their needs met as not only children, but as adults eventually. And I think that sets us up nicely for this next part of this topic, which is talking about the future. And what the narrative looks like for you and your family. I have families in clinic who will say things to me like, of course they're going to college. Like, why wouldn't they go to college? Like, yeah, what? Like, it's almost like they look at you like you're crazy, kind of like, why? Like, of course, like, why would we wouldn't even think that? There are families on the other spectrum that are like, why would we make them do math homework? They're never going to use math. Why would we make them do that when they have all these other things they have to deal with, right? Like, those are families in two very different ends of the spectrum here, right? The first family I would see, and I see these families, is these are families who have shifted in their narrative, and they're like, we're thinking of possibilities, right? Like, where there's a will, there's a way. Might look different, but we're going to get this done. The second family is a family that I contact as a family that maybe has not started to shift their perspective around the narrative that they're using to talk about DMD in their family. As a psychologist, the problems that I see when we're not thinking of possibilities, we're not preparing our children for the future, is that they have a lot more challenges, right? Because what happens is if we don't learn these things, we don't keep the foundation of, why do we learn math, right? Well, math skills alive is we're closing doors to opportunity, to choice that we have as adults, right? And so you're limiting your children's choices when we take that approach to, we don't make this something they have to learn. We don't prioritize this. Because learning to do things we don't want to do is a super important life skill, right? And there are benefits to these things that maybe aren't the immediate benefit, right? Like I don't use calculus, but I take calculus in high school, right? Do you guys use calculus? No, but it helps with other things that you learned, through learning that skill. Sometimes students with conditions like Duchenne will say, like, what's the point, right? But that's not true. It's not true at all. You're creating those disadvantages, and your children should know how to be flexible, and they should know how to learn things that are harder, that they don't have interest in or they don't want to learn. And they should learn to be okay and not just wonderful at everything, right? Like it's okay to be okay at things. They should know how to work hard on things and to see things to fruition and to complete things, even if it's not something we're interested in. Those are just really valuable life lessons, even if they don't end up choosing a degree in math or go to college, that's their choice, right? Not something that was decided for them, but it's their choice. A similar concept I come across a lot is making exceptions for kids living with Duchenne. I see a lot of families who don't make their kids do chores, or they don't hold them as accountable as to other kids or their own other kids in situations when they're maybe being rude or not managing their own emotions or behavior really well when they're upset. And I think that these are things that put kids at a disadvantage socially, right? These are skills that are going to be valuable to them later on, whether it's social relationships, navigating the workplace. We all have bosses that we don't like all the time, right? You can't just like lose your stuff, and people are gonna be like, oh well, he's like 27, but he's got Duchenne, so it's okay, right? They're gonna be like, that's not appropriate behavior for the workplace with him. So you want them to have those basic skills. And so I'm wondering, JB, what sort of rules and expectations do you have for Charlie at your house?
Well, I was wondering if you were going to ask this. It's a great question, because even within our own family, like with extended family, we do see this happening, right? So we really have to make sure that we are assertive and what we think is appropriate. I posted a picture on Facebook once, and it was after Charlie had stopped walking. He was on the floor sweeping his room with his little hand broom, and people were outraged. You would not believe the comments and the private messages, the phone calls that I got. People were like, you make him sweep the floor? I just thought, well, yeah, it's called being a member of our family. We're all expected to clean up our space. Why would I not expect him to sweep his room? That just doesn't make sense to me. But it does go back to that whole, well, are they going to use math? Why does it matter? Well, yeah, these things matter. Our family we are a family that's focused on community service. And if we did not require him to participate in that aspect of our lives, then we would lose out on so much time with him, because it is such a core, important value to us to be active in our community. And, when you're on a chair, it doesn't mean that you can't pick up litter. It doesn't mean that you can't go work at the animal shelter. It just means you're going to do it differently. Yeah. These are things that really our family finds great value in. You're contributors. And that means that even when you're in a chair, buddy, you're going to contribute. And what's great about this, Dr. Truba, is like, we taught him, like, yeah, we can do everything. We just do it differently. And so now that's his answer. When people say, oh, can you do that? What do we need to do so you can participate? And he's like, I'll figure that out. I can do it. I just do it differently. Like, it's such a life skill that he has now. And we have to set them up for this, right? It doesn't just happen, we have to make sure that they feel able, right?
I love that advice. That was wonderful advice, JB. Thank you for sharing that. It's important to set expectations for all children, for all of your children, because kids are going to surprise you with what they achieve and what they can accomplish in relation to the expectations you set for them. This could look like chores, like in JB's example, because chores are an important part of growing up, right? They teach us all those important life skills I've kind of gone over. But there's also chores related to Duchenne, right? You have a lot of things you have to do when you have Duchenne that other kids don't have to do, your peers don't have to do, your siblings don't have to do. We can conceptualize those things as chores as well. And we talk about that in the ways that these are chores you have to do, right? And just like the expectation for your so-and-so, your little brother, your sister doing chores, that they do it without whining and complaining and without causing additional hardship. And we do what we need to do to get through of it, because You know, if you're doing those things, that impacts the whole family. And this is like something to help the family, right? So your job here is to accept that you need to do these things and to do them. That's the chore, right? And so sometimes even framing these things in the context of the demands they do have to live with that aren't fair to them, right? Just because it's not fair doesn't mean we don't do it. Like, it sucks, and we just have to figure out a way to do it. And that helps them understand too, right? And the siblings, right? Like, helping them just take that perspective around, like, how do we think about community living, and like, what are chores and what are the ways that people help contribute to a community. Just really powerful. So thank you for that, JB. We're coming to the end of the program, believe it or not, right? Feels like time flies. But before I do, I want to summarize a few things. The tip one, remember, was understand the value of a constructive mindset. Tip two, shift your perspective on care, support, and equipment. And tip three, reset perceptions of the future in an evolving world. I know we threw a lot of information at y'all today. If there's one thing that I hope you take away, it's that shifting your perspective is hard, but it can be incredibly powerful. Not just the way you live life, but in developing and cultivating a life of quality that is values consistent, that brings you joy. JB, any final thoughts from your end? Anything that you'd like to share with the audience?
Yeah, I've really just enjoyed, sharing with our community today, especially on something that I feel so passionate about, the positive mindset. But I would like to remind us that as our children grow and we expect that they will navigate these seasons and these changes, it's really important that we do that too as parents. Like, we have to be open to the tools and these things that we can put into place in our lives when we're comfortable and getting there, right? We need to remind ourselves to lean into them and to make use of them, right? It's a constant, evaluation, and then like leaning into what's possible. But a positive mindset really is the most valuable tool I feel that we have. And so I'm grateful to be able to share all of that with you guys today. Thank you for allowing me to do so.
Thank you, JB. We've come to the end of our conversation. I'd like to thank JB again for sharing her experiences and wisdom with us as a mom living this life. It's wonderful to have an opportunity to discuss these types of important topics with you and with other members of the Duchenne and Becker muscular dystrophy community. I'm going to hand it back over to Tim, who's going to wrap things up for us. Thank you all so much.
And so thank you, Dr. Trouba. Thank you, JB. Your tips and tricks and your commentary are really an inspiration for the Duchenne community. And I'm sure those who joined us today will agree. So like I mentioned at the beginning, I have a QR code up on the screen, and it drives to duchenne.com/connect. I encourage all of you to sign up on this site, as it'll help you stay connected to other webinars and other helpful resources that we'll be sharing in the future. It's a quick form. It only takes a few seconds to fill out. And with that, thank you very much to everyone who joined us, and I hope you have a wonderful day. Take care. Bye-bye.